Hey folks, welcome back. Thank you for joining me on this audio video journey through my book, Purpose Work Nation. So this is the third video, and we're going to cover the opening quotes in the introduction. Now, the opening quotes probably won't make much sense unless you've read the author's notes 2 and 3. So 2 looks at what is the purpose of the United States, and then 3 looks at why it matters that we fulfill on it, and to choose it, actually, to choose our citizenship, choose these principles. So let's dive in. Opening quotes. This is from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. One day, this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. The second one is from Amanda Gorman from the 2021 presidential inauguration. Somehow we've weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished. To compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. And so we lift up our gazes, not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first, we must first put our differences aside. But while democracy can be periodically delayed, it could never be permanently defeated. So that's what we're up to. That's what America's up to. That's what business is up to. Whether or not we've owned or embraced it yet, but my hope is that you have chosen citizenship, you've chosen the ideals upon which this nation stands. Because like I said earlier, if we're not talking about these ideals, we're not talking about America. We're talking about a dystopia, a classist apartheid of some flavor. So what Gorman and Dr. King are pointing to is that we have work to do. We have not finished this nation. We have not fulfilled on this grand and noble purpose. So let's dive into the introduction here. Hey Mike, good to see you. So what's up with black people? I pause, shock, squirm. I was speaking with a CEO after his organization had just completed a multi-session anti-racism program. We had developed a connection during the training, and I offered to meet with him about my own journey towards allyship. And to hear these words from him, what's up with black people, after the powerful program we had all experienced together, made me wonder what feelings he had about black folks before the training. It was the summer of 2020, and Black Lives Matter protests were sweeping the globe. And companies were scrambling to both demonstrate support for BLM and give serious attention to diversity, equity, and inclusion. DEI budgets ballooned, and by September 2020, there were over 100,000 open DEI positions on LinkedIn. In part, our engagement at Mike's organization was a result of George Floyd's tragic murder and the moral awakening that men like us had witnessed or had experienced after witnessing it. I would discover over the course of our conversations that he wanted to make sense of the racial unrest and the impoverished state of many BIPOC communities, and find a way to express his own commitment to inclusion without abandoning his conservative identity. Mike was looking for coherence and a path forward. He valued individualism and personal responsibility, and was having trouble squaring it with his new knowledge of the role that systemic racism plays in tilting the tables against black folks. Mike was also a consumer of media that had been painting BLM as a violent, lesbian, socialist domestic terror organization, and suggesting that Antifa supporters were both fragile snowflakes on one hand and also, magically, a dangerous domestic terror organization. Both assertions have been proven false. Further, 93% of the 2020 protests were not violent. So to activate one's allyship in the face of the disinformation coming out of traditional and social media organizations in 2020 was a difficult task. It would be far easier to look the other way. More importantly, he was beginning to see how a lack of inclusion was morally abhorrent to him as an American and as a man of faith. Nowhere is it written in the Bible, Torah, Quran, Tao Te Ching, Bhagavad Gita, or Upanishads that a human life is unworthy of dignity, acceptance, and equal opportunity. Indeed, these sacred texts say some version of the opposite. I could feel the tension in his heart. On one hand, he wanted all the BLM stuff, the protests, the riots, the lawsuits, etc., just to go away. And on the other hand, he knew it couldn't until justice was served and equity was achieved. As they say, no justice, no peace. I learned that deep down, Mike felt leading inclusively was a personal expression of his Christian faith, his values, and his citizenship. He was called into service on this front, but unsure how to square it with his conservative beliefs and the expectations of his board and pressure from his investors. We know he's not alone. 90% of white men place some value on DEI, with 42% believing it is very or extremely important to them. Many of these 42% who deeply believe DEI is important simply do not know how to support it. Less than half of these true believers have ever confronted anyone about an exclusionary comment or behavior, and most have not voluntarily joined an employee resource group, or ERG. Many of us want to see the world improve, but are unsure how or where to begin. In light of the prevailing overwork, always-on rat race ethos of America's work culture, plus the endless pressure from board members and investors to beat quarterly earnings, along with the organizational inertia, ignoring this call is understandable. It's understandable to want to look away from this fact. If success was only about hard work, then the executive suite would look like a Benetton ad, and first-generation immigrants would rule the world. How much longer can we look away? Historically, the few leaders who courageously answered a call to create inclusive cultures and activate the purpose of the United States frequently failed. Consider that the last 2 decades of DEI, hiring quotas, mentoring programs, employee resource groups, mandatory bias trainings, anonymous reporting systems, have failed to produce results for our BIPOC, female, and LGBTQIA+ team members. A 2016 Harvard Business Review study of the DEI efforts of 800 organizations revealed that, on the whole, the field delivered neutral to negative outcomes. And this is after sinking $8 billion a year into DEI. In part, this failure was due to the moralizing and compliance-driven nature of traditional DEI, which made people in power, mostly straight white men, feel attacked. This phenomenon triggers the complainer effect, where people who are called out get defensive. This is why they deny, repress, minimalize any attempts to criticize their behavior. So leaders are right to be careful as they inclusively develop their cultures. And yet, this is the tension. Leaders know that culture matters, that they can no longer stay silent on social issues. 62% of adults now demand that companies take a stand on social, economic, and environmental issues. And 87% of consumers believe businesses should put just as much attention on social issues as economic results. So I'll pause here for a second. So the old adage of like the business of business is business from Milton Friedman, 1970, no longer applies. Meaning the people, we the people, have said, we don't trust the government, we only trust the business. And if we're to have any sense of equity or flourishing, business has to take a stand, in-house and externally. And now we have hard data to back this up. The three biggest stakeholders, the first being employees, second, customers, and the third, investors, are now demanding generative approaches to doing business. So that means being equitable, sustainable, being having like a pro-social vision, having like taking a vocal stand on the issues that our society is confronted with. So all these things are happening, and so CEOs are feeling the pressure. Customers, employees, investors, all saying purpose, 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 impact, equity, flourishing, inclusion. So these leaders have also seen culture issues torpedo mergers and acquisitions and other critical strategies and be the source of scandal and corruption. They've seen the results of missed hiring, retention, and performance goals. They've seen top talent flee for startups and organizations with inclusive cultures, great Glassdoor ratings, and B Corp designations. So Glassdoor is a site that rates how employees feel, and B Corp is a designation, a voluntary designation, to be held accountable to not only the organization's purpose and mission, but also to its social and environmental impacts. So leaders are stuck between taking the traditional laissez-faire approach to culture, ensuring the same white guys get hired and promoted, resulting in lawsuits, missed targets, customer and employee churn, and actively crafting culture, which will take a bunch of time and money and is unlikely to succeed under the current DEI paradigm. Until very recently, this was an unresolvable tension. It's basically damned if you do, damned if you don't. In 2020, my colleague Christina Asbady and I co-authored a research study in partnership with Golden Gate University to measure and assess a unique culture change method with a global biotechnology company with 50,000 plus employees. This method involved forming small, diverse peer learning groups, so groups of 4 that have been optimized for diversity, who committed to learning something together over time. And we saw outstanding results. 95% course completion versus the 5% industry completion rate. 85% of folks took new actions. 76% of folks developed new daily habits. Further, 98% of participants experienced respect from their diverse peers. 96% experienced empathy from their diverse peers. And women and BIPOC employees reported increases in organizational commitment of 11.3 and 13.6% respectively. So that was 2020. I'll now update you with some new research. Actually, just not research, but new stats that we've seen at Unity Lab. Very similar. Over 90% completion rates. Over 90% of folks are experiencing respect, empathy, feel comfortable sharing their fears and concerns with each other. And over 80% prefer this learning method. And they choose to continue meeting with their groups after the experience. Because what happens actually inside of these small groups or this program, because in each module, folks are doing some self-discovery, so some reflection on their purpose and values, taking new actions at work to express who they really are. And these aren't like off-center strategic actions. These are just team leadership, communication type actions. And spending 1 hour with each other to debrief how it went. So they follow a discussion guide. Again, this is all peer-led. So these 4 folks take turns rotating the facilitator following a guide. So this is a scalable methodology that actually creates the attitudinal changes that support inclusion, that support mutual concern, respect, empathy. And what is missing right now is that almost everybody thinks of DEI in the old way. They're not thinking about it in this new way. And we're going to get into this later in the book when we expose really how almost every single people function, and especially DEI, has a paternalistic, elitist, and moralizing impact, and that there's a brand new way. So when this method is used to activate employees' purpose, as a reminder, I define purpose as the transcendent identity beyond concerns of self and family that includes many aspects such as vision for the world, mission, craft, your greatest gifts, and your most cherished virtues. And for a deeper dive into all 10 aspects of purpose and the purpose activation process and purposeful leadership, you can check out my previous book, Planet on Purpose. So when this method is used to activate employee purpose at work, both people and organizations thrive, as purpose is correlated with a 175% increase in productivity, 63% increase in leadership effectiveness, 30% increase in innovation, 4x reduction in anxiety in diverse environments, and 7.4 months in additional tenure. Now there's other positive impacts. So you can go to scienceofpurpose.org where you can see all the economic impacts, because this is a highly studied thing. So the research on purpose is probably more robust and conclusive than other forms of psychosocial development or interventions. So there's, if you think about, everyone's talking about yoga and meditation. Well, yes, those are good, and I do those personally. They're good things, but they're not showing the same results as purpose. When purpose comes online, people have a greater sense of self-esteem, confidence, courage. They are better able to emotionally regulate. So my friends at Kumanu have done some amazing research on purpose and have found that people who know their purpose are over 500% more resilient, meaning because they're connected to who they really are, their circumstances empower them to actually feel okay about it, feel empowered to deal with it. Similarly, over 500% increase in emotional regulation. So they're not like emotionally triggered and damaged by things that aren't working in their life, families, and career. And again, we're going to go into much greater detail later. So new tools and approaches are now available for leaders to achieve their performance goals and reduce risk and employee turnover by activating purpose and belonging in small, diverse peer learning groups. In doing so, they also activate our nation's purpose by nurturing relationships across gender, political, and racial differences. Before we explore this proven pathway, we'll need to lay down a foundation. So broadly, this book is divided into two parts. Chapters 1 through 3 are more historical and philosophical, examining the purpose, history, challenges, and opportunities facing our nation and our organizations. And then chapters 4 through 6 are more tactical, looking at how you can lead your organization into a flourishing future, and in so doing, steward our nation's purpose. We'll begin by looking at why organizations are the front line in the fight for our nation's purpose. So that's chapter 1. And in short, America is deeply segregated racially, economically, geographically, generationally, and politically. In the workplace is where we have the best opportunity to connect across boundaries and share a commitment to learn and grow together. So I want to pause here for a second. For most folks in the United States, work is the only place they experience any diversity. Because even if you live in a racially diverse place, like a major metropolitan area like I do here in San Diego, it's segregated. Like white folks live here, Hispanic folks live there, Asian folks live there, black folks live there. And this is, a result of redlining and other, black codes, essentially, Jim Crow laws that have historically segregated us. And it's actually getting worse. We're not becoming a melting pot. We're not integrating. And all you need to do is just reflect on your own experience. You're probably doing, going to one store where you're not interacting with people across race, gender, maybe a little gender, but or sexuality, and then going to another restaurant, then going to another gym, and it's fairly homogenized, and especially if you're white. The study will explore later. 90% of white folks only have other white folks in their networks. So white folks are actually the most segregated in the United States. And so the workplace is, like I said, for most folks, the only opportunity to ever experience anyone different. Because, like I said, where we live is homogenized, where we eat, buy, work out, enjoy food and drink, pretty darn segregated. So we'll also look at a unifying mythology to guide our leadership and nation in the return on investment of activating purpose and belonging. So in chapter 2. So this unifying mythology is really the bison that I'd mentioned earlier. So look at the ethics of the bison. Next, we'll look at the urgent need to shift culture in chapter 3. So to make culture strategic in organizations and hopefully every other sector as well. Because, like I said, we're at this precipice of imminent civil war. Like it's cold. We have a cold civil war. We have racial and political violence. As I'll share, my house was targeted by a white nationalist organization for our Black Lives Matter sign. So this is not theoretical, right? This is happening, and culture has to be made strategic in organizations, or else organizations are going to be complicit and party to the Civil War. We'll then explore how the old way of doing learning and development, L&D, DEI, wellness, and culture is a huge waste of time and money. And it actually creates greater inequity, division, disengagement. And we'll look at this new way that I just mentioned, building authentic, high-trust, diverse relationships across an organization delivers better results and enables unprecedented productivity, innovation, well-being, information transfer, and organizational commitment. So that's chapter 4. We'll then dive into the two most powerful drivers of organizational flourishing: employee purpose and belonging. Chapter 5. So that's where lay out all the research on purpose and belonging. And again, you can find all the purpose stuff at scienceofpurpose.org. And we'll conclude with an approach in chapter 6 for activating a culture of purpose belonging in your organization. So it's really kind of like a roadmap, a guidebook. Well, here's how you might begin. And again, every organization is different, so there's no one size fits all, but it's helpful to have some kind of linear approach to begin the organizational transformation. So now let's begin with an exploration into the past, present, and future possibilities of business in this nation. So that's chapter 1, which we'll talk about next time. Thank you all for being on this journey with me, with us, with America. And again, if you want to engage more deeply bring me in to speak, or activate purpose and belonging in your own career, join a book club, all sorts of great opportunities to take this work deeper now in the links in the description. See you next time.